you keep it on so we can see your faces. And then just please mute your mic unless you're speaking. And also, just so you're aware, we want these presentations to be super interactive. So if I'm speaking, Stephanie will be monitoring the chat and answering any questions, and vice versa as we go through. So even if someone's speaking, if you have any questions or even just want to leave a comment, please interact via the chat. And so we will move on to what to expect for today. So we're going to start with some introductions just so we can have a feel of who's here right now and get to know one another. Then I'm going to go through the inspiration for Obliquity, how we started last year, and again, some expectations for what you'll see in the series this year. And then Stephanie will take over for the remainder of the workshop and tell you about her journey and how she ended up in medicine. So what we'll do is, if we can just get everyone, we can take turns going around. If you could just say your name, what you do for a living, and what you hope to get out of the session today, or what interested you in the series.
I can kick things off. I'm Stephanie. I'm a med student, and I am super excited to get the chance, super honored to get the chance to share my journey with you all.
Perfect. Okay, so I have the Batman logo up here. When creating the website, I was thinking about a way that we could kind of capture the essence that I believe is medical humanities. And it came in part from this article I read. I actually just did this writing retreat called Writing is Craft with two individuals out of Ontario, Shane and Damien, and they were amazing mentors, and they took us through this whole weekend that was on Zoom, and that kind of actually helped me feel a bit more comfortable about doing our workshops over Zoom. And so in this article that they had brought up in our writing retreat, and I have the link there for you, it talks about to treat a poem as a site of a predetermined set of useful things is to fail to treat it as a poem. And so that really resonated with me, because I think sometimes when we talk about narrative medicine, or trying to find the bridge between medicine and the humanities, we forget that we can't just all of a sudden take a text or take Shakespeare or take a poem and then just say, okay, you're going to read this and you're going to learn exactly this from this piece of work or from this piece of art. And I think that that's very important that we recognize we're not trying to now just utilize the humanities as a tool to extract teaching medical students empathy or teaching a certain task. It's really something that complements learning. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but really trying to bridge the two disciplines together and realize that they are very interconnected and interdependent on one another, and that we don't need to necessarily partition them as much as we do. So Obliquity's vision is that it's not a cure-all, and we don't promise to be the snake oil to tragedy and burnout, but we promise to offer tools that are useful, applicable, and maybe even stylish. And so we will be what the Batmobile is to Batman: cool, innovative, and ready to traverse your metaphorical Gotham. So that is what we hope to accomplish this year, and that is our kind of mandate as Obliquity in general. And so I'll talk a little bit now about how we started initially. And so this is our second year running this poetry and medicine workshop series. And where it all started was actually back in high school. So I went to high school in Calgary, and my high school was called FFCA, and it was a pretty small high school. I think in my graduating class, we had about 120 people. And by far my favorite class was my English 20, and it was an AP class. And I'm not sure if it was because it was an AP class that this is how it became structured, but it was definitely because of this teacher, Miss Walensky. And so what she did is that for the first time in my entire, I think, high school career, we had a mixed class. So from grades 10, 11, and 12, all students were in the exact same class. And then what she also did was she, just for this class, not for her other classes, she put the desks into pods of 4. And so there would be a variety of students from different grades in what she called family groups. And so in this class, we all did the exact same assignments. And all that varied was the rubrics based on kind of if we were doing diplomas in grade 12, and the other students were being graded based on the grade 10 or the grade 11 curriculum. And so essentially we all had, because we were all doing the same assessments and assignments, we had the same work that we were doing. We were all working on the same things, but the way that we were graded was based on our grade level. And what I found in placing us in these family groups is they really forced us to collaborate as actual peers. It didn't matter who was in grade 10, who was in grade 11, who was in grade 12. Each person, as we went through these different assignments, you began to see who had a lot of strength in story writing, or who was the poet of the group, who was really good at those critical essays where you had to argue a point, which I absolutely hated, but there were people who were good at that. And so I think for me, that really kind of, I guess, lit the fire for interdisciplinary relationships and also true collaboration. Really the idea of seeing people for the strengths that they have and what they can offer for a group, and not for titles or different designations that are attached to that person. So that was my experience back in high school. Then I had the privilege, when I got into university, I did a biological sciences degree, but I think it was a week before I started, I got this email and it said, you should apply for the Arts and Science Honors Academy. And I had no idea what it was, but I was like, oh, arts and science, that sounds cool. I should try this out. So I filled out the application, and that was where I met Dr. Magadi. Interestingly enough, he'll actually be giving our third workshop, and he is the director of the Arts and Science Honors Academy that I was a part of in university. And essentially the whole framework for this course is that we take one class per semester, and we had this small cohort of students. Again, they were all from different degrees. So there were people like me from the sciences, we had some people from the arts, and I think we had a few students from kinesiology and sort of physical sciences as well. And so ASHA, honestly, it showed to me that in university, and because I had known when I started first year university that I wanted to get into medicine, and also I had a guidance counselor in high school tell me that that was the pathway to medicine. There was no other way. You go into biological sciences, and that is how you get into medicine. And so this program really reminded me that education is so much more than just filling a prerequisite to achieve some later goal that you hope to achieve, whether that's going to professional school or trying to get a certain job. That education is really enrichment, and it's following things that you're passionate about and really seeking to expand your intellectual curiosity in a way that can kind of push you forward every step of your journey. And in my final project for ASHA in my fourth year of my undergrad, we had sort of a symposium. And so what I did was I made this poster and I called it ASHA, the corpus callosum of education. And I'll bring that idea back a little bit later, but I think that's really what we need to be working towards in these two disciplines of the arts and sciences that are so often kind of put on opposite sides of any kind of discussion. We even have the right side and left side of the brain debate where everything is kind of segregated and they don't ever interconnect. And so again, another goal with Obliquity in creating this workshop series is to find that corpus callosum and find the interconnectedness between these two disciplines. And then finally, poetry. So why is this a poetry workshop or humanities and medicine workshop? Is because for me, my artistic side is writing, and poetry is kind of where my preferred medium and where I find the most kind of comfort and I guess my best style of writing, in my opinion. And so I really wanted to showcase poetry in this workshop series and talk about how it's helped me. And also, interestingly enough, there's actually a lot of physician poets. There's even more physician writers. And so I think that just that in itself is a testament to how humanities somehow find their way to creep into medicine and the sciences. And I mentioned this a little bit as well. This specific series this year was really developed around this writing retreat that I attended, Writing is Craft. In that workshop series, everything was over Zoom. And so again, some of the the rules slide that I had at the beginning about keeping cameras on and mics off, etc. A lot of those principles came from this Zoom retreat that I did, and also just the level of interaction and how some of the activities that we'll do at the end, I learned a lot from this retreat. So I hope that it will flow as well as this one did, and we can, if you have any feedback or questions, please let me know as we move along. Okay, so I think a conversation about the arts and sciences and the bridge between them would be very incomplete if one was not to bring up Leonardo da Vinci. And so you can see the Vitruvian Man here. And I actually just recently listened to a podcast that was talking about Leonardo da Vinci and one of the longer biographies that was written about him. And the director of the podcast had asked the person who wrote this book, and I forget his name right now, but he asked him, if you could have asked Leonardo da Vinci if he was an artist or a scientist, he would see no difference between the two. And I thought that was beautiful. And in my limited knowledge of Da Vinci, I love his work, and I've gone to a bunch of museums with his pieces displayed, but there's so much Da Vinci stuff that one could go through. Becoming an expert on Da Vinci is insane. But from my basic knowledge, Da Vinci to me is really an icon of creating the corpus callosum and kind of disintegrating this partition between the arts and sciences. And from his work, even the Vitruvian Man, starting off on his kind of artistic side with drawing and figuring out human anatomy in the figure, and then going back to his anatomical studies with cadavers and understanding how every little centimeter of the body was placed, and then going back again to these drawings to see how he could find the innate symmetries in the human body and the artistic kind of beauty that he captured, but through his almost scientific precision and intense study of anatomy. And so Leonardo da Vinci is definitely one of my arts and science mentors and idols. I also learned this in the podcast, but the Mona Lisa, I believe he started in 1503. And I think it was a cloth merchant's wife. I believe it was a commission piece. So this merchant asked Da Vinci to paint a picture of his wife. And I think he was working on it for something insane, like 14 years, because he would start off the painting and he'd kind of do it to the best of his eye. And then again, he'd go and do these anatomical studies, and he has, I don't even know how many notebooks, but while he was doing these studies, and specifically with the Mona Lisa, it was a study on the smile. And so as he was doing that, he'd make these notes as he did different dissections and learn more about what makes up a smile on the scientific side of the muscles and everything involved, but also his sort of artistic study of watching people go by and looking at the woman that he was supposed to be painting. And so there were so many reworkings of the Mona Lisa until he believed that he had captured what he essentially thought the essence of the smile was. And I think that that's an ode to sort of the never-ending curiosity that drove his development and drove his work. And I think that curiosity and that integration is a really important part of moving away from this partition into that corpus callosum. Which brings me to our activity for this session. So I've done this activity in the past, and usually it's called the teapot activity because typically I actually have two teapots, and they're each filled with, one teapot is filled with sort of more artistic or sensual words, and the second teapot is filled with more scientific and tangible words. And so for today, what I'm going to do is in a second, I'm going to send each of you a set of 2 words. And so I've done this in the past. I've said that the 2 words have to be turned into a poem, but for the purposes of this workshop, I'm going to say that you can turn the 2 words into anything. If you choose to draw something or write a story, a short story or something like that, feel free to do whatever you want with these 2 words. I'm going to split people into breakout rooms, and I think it'll probably be pairs. So you'll have 5 to 10 minutes in the breakout room, and you can have we'll say 10 minutes. So you can have the first 5 minutes to kind of do whatever you want with the 2 words, and then you can discuss with your partner. And whoever, once we come back in the large group, one person from the pair can share, or we have a smaller group today, so whoever is willing to share can do so when we come back in the larger group.
I can go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'll start off with what I wrote, and then Stephanie was my partner, and then I'll discuss, I guess, both of ours quickly. So starting with mine, my 2 words were loneliness and helium. So here it goes. Helium embraces itself, floating into the expanse. A scene of loneliness, others say. Brilliance, I say. And I wrote this because I think for people who maybe are more introverted, sometimes that can be perceived by others as if somebody's in trouble, maybe something wrong with that person's mental health. But maybe, for the individual, they're in a perfect place. So I kind of want to show that with this little piece, that like it could be the same scene and somebody could observe it as possibly somebody struggling. At the other time, the individual themselves maybe that's how they connect to their deepest self. So I wanted to show that. So that's what I wrote with those 2 words. And then the next one, if Stephanie could just show the picture. So her 2 words were empathize and characterize. I think what really got my attention was seeing how the eyes were, blindfolded, and I think that was very powerful because it draws the attention to the hands. And I think when you think about empathy, I mean, for me personally, the hands are the hands are a very personal thing, and I think the empathy and how kind of the sense of touch is tying on this idea of empathy. And then characterize, Stephanie, if you want to say a little bit more about characterize, but go ahead. Yeah,
totally. Thanks for that intro. I just add that when I thought of characterize, or when I thought of touch, well, the reason that I drew something that related to touch was that I felt like touch, when you're touching, you're like discovering as well. So it's a intimacy, but it's also a discovering, like it's one of your senses. And so it's like you're characterizing, or you're discovering kind of what's in front of you. Yeah, it's fine.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was super good.
Before the next person goes, Steph, do you mind sharing your screen again? We had Rebecca join in later, just so she has an idea of what we're all talking about. Perfect. While that's loading, thank you, Shankar and Stephanie, for sharing. Does anyone want to share what they wrote or created from their 2 words?
I can go. So my words were boom and trend. I didn't actually draw this out because Jamie and I both said that we're terrible artists and can't draw, but this is the imagery I kind of got. So when I was thinking about the word trend, I kind of thought of like social trends and like, things that kind of go viral and pop culture. And so I just kind of saw like this linear outward trends sort of thing. And then in different parts of the line, there's like I guess a social explosion is what Jamie and I called it, of just different things that explode, and then everybody is into it, or is it is assimilated into our culture. So that's the imagery that I couldn't draw, but that's what I had. And then Jamie had a really cool one, and she had, I think, soaring and mechanic, exciting, and she made a really cool distinction about how soaring is not the same as flying, and I thought that was really interesting, and I'll kind of maybe let her talk more about that.
I feel like I've been put on the spot. Yeah, so my 2
Sorry.
That's okay. My 2 words were soaring and mechanical, and the first image that came to mind with soaring mechanical was the idea of like Leonardo da Vinci's plane, or his helicopter as well, which of course was inspired because we were just talking about Leonardo da Vinci, and so that's top of the mind. But yeah, as Jesse was saying, what stood out to me was that soaring is very different than flying. Soaring embodies this like human desire to do something, whereas flying feels like a much more mechanical process. And with the idea of Leonardo da Vinci's plane, just like looking at it visually, what I think about is how this mechanical thing encapsulates the dreaming and the desire to soar, but in doing so, it kind of removes the mysticism from it. And so there's kind of like cyclical relationship of how making something mechanical kind of decreases part of the desire for it, even though its intent was to fulfill that desire. So yeah, no formal poem from me either, but that was kind of the thought process that came to mind. Yeah, if you look up Leonardo's drawings from his plane, I feel like, yeah, I don't know, it's such a fascinating drawing that he has in some of his work with that. So I would encourage you to do that.
I love how you created that concept, the idea of when you make something mechanical, it takes away the mysticism. I think that's incredible that you were able to kind of put that together in 5 minutes too. So thank you for sharing.
Talk maybe about my group, if that's okay, if we still have time.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we talked a little bit about like what's in a name. So my words were wonder and characterize. And for some reason, we got onto the topic of naming things, maybe naming projects, naming our poems, and how as human beings, we like to put things in categories, and we like to draw out diagrams and what that does to the thing. So that's kind of what my poem is about, using my 2 words, wonder and characterize. So my poem's called Phylogeny. Delineate, decide, describe, characterize, divide once, twice, maybe a third, excise meaning and represent it in an unoffensive 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter diagram, and don't you dare forget the caption. Repeat until wonder emerge from cracks drawn from living things, until we have succeeded in lining boats with Drosophila and hagfish, penned extinct with extant, rare and common, until breathlessness overtakes our scratchings, etchings on wood and heavy tomes. Here, I said, is where I felt wonder. This is where it fell at my feet and gasped a dying breath in its pretty penultimate figure form. So kind of like the idea that, and she had a really beautiful poem about a tree reflecting in water and what's true about that. And when we represent a thing, where's the truth and where do we find its true essence?
I can share as well. So my 2 words were reflection and proof. And so when I first was thinking about reflection and proof, at first I was like, reflection, oh, Lacan mirror stage, yay. And then I got thinking about the grad school class I was in, my very first semester of my master's program, and how we got on to topic of like Derrida and difference, and sort of the dichotomy between the objective and the subjective, and whether or not there's actually a dichotomy there at all. So I did not name my poem because I am very against titles, because I change them constantly and I can never decide on anything. So this is my untitled poem. The reflection of a tree in still water, a mirror. As the water begins to ripple, the leaves rustle. Though the leaves never rustled, but didn't they? What proof do you have? It's very short. Yes.
Thank you both for sharing. I also really love doing this activity in pairs because it seems like both of you, although you enjoyed kind of reflecting on those 2 words in the form of a poem, you can see the intrinsic difference in style that you 2 have. And also I think the way that you write each line and each stanza of your poems is unique and beautiful in its own way. And that was such a great example. So thank you. Okay, Steph, I will hand it over to you to take away.
All right, I'll unmute myself. Perfect. So, thank you so much for coming to listen to my story here. We're going to go through a bit of a journey, and the point is for you to see just the ways that I discovered the incredible links between art and medicine and my dreams for where it will go in the future. Okay. Ooh. Sweet. So to start us off, let's go all the way back to when I was a little girl. And there are 2 things you should know about me then. The first, that'll set the stage for what comes next. First, my grandmother let me watch a C-section on TV that blew my tiny brain and thrilled my senses. The idea of cutting a person's flesh and getting the honor of seeing their insides for the purpose of fixing them totally flabbergasted me and delighted me. And from then on, I told everyone I was going to be a surgeon when I grew up. The second thing you should know about me is that from the very beginning, from the depths of my heart, I have loved God, or who I understood God to be. And this man, Jesus, who I heard about, the wildness of his life, how he saw people suffering and was able to fix them. A bunch of people with leprosy rejected by society, he heals them. A man with a gnarled hand, he heals it. Epilepsy, healed. A mother crying over her dead daughter, he brings her back to life. I was thrilled. I was like, this man is amazing. And then the ultimate doom, death, he goes and sacrifices himself so that there was a way to die, but not ultimately die, that he wanted little me with him in delight. My heart was so sold. Okay, moving on to high school. I was just as passionate about Jesus, less passionate about medicine. I had hardly seen the inside of a hospital, and I had no real concept of what medicine actually was. It was then that I discovered art. So in my high school art class, my teacher encouraged us to do research about artists and the power of art to make a difference in society. So that's where I discovered William Turner's treatment of light, Lucian Freud's treatment of the flesh, but mostly the artist I fell in love with was Banksy. I was just so excited by his political statements, and I felt like in exploring and researching Banksy, I discovered that art has the power to discuss painful, beautiful, controversial, mystical, and practical topics, all in a way that speak past people's stubborn minds and right into their hearts through the use of emotion. So, and as a young high school student, I was brimming with ideas and I was passionately in love with art. I was totally converted. So after high school, I took a year off. I went to New Zealand and Hollywood. I worked in construction, and I wrestled with God about my future. Because in my heart was passionate about art, but there was this voice that kept whispering, medicine, healer, medicine, medicine. So that spring, I went to a U of A open house, and one of the speakers stood up and said, "Hello, my name is Dr. such and such." I don't remember his name. "I am a thoracic surgeon, and I did my undergraduate degree in French literature. If you're interested in medicine, I encourage you, pursue other passions in your undergrad degree. They'll enrich your medical life, and you'll have plenty of time for sciences later." I was like, yes, thank you. Okay, I can do this. So I applied for arts at the U of A, and I spent my undergrad degree running from sociology to painting to biochem to sculpture to physics to poetry to German. And I just took enough sciences to pass the MCAT. But in my undergrad, I started to doubt that medicine was really where I should be, because every science student that I met seemed stressed and anxious about every grade. But my colleagues in my painting classes all wanted to be artists, and they were willing to take chances and make mistakes and get bad marks on their journey to creating something worth doing, and to have a practice that was meaningful. So I started doubting that whispered voice, and medicine seemed strict and stuffy, and the arts seemed freeing and powerful. And that's when I first heard about laser presentations. So laser stands for Leonardo Art and Science Evening Rendezvous. There are times where different types of artists and scientists come together to discuss, share their research, and collaborate. They happen all around the world, and I was super grateful to be here at U of A at the time where they started doing them. So this particular evening that I attended, the speakers were amazing. There was Sean Caulfield, who was talking about using art at a UN conference to help policymakers understand different perspectives on vaccination. Super cool. Michiko Manuyama, who is a cardiology resident, also doing a master's in design at the same time and creating super cool tools, these like paper toys for patients to better understand their bodies. And then best of all, I thought there was this dentist, her name was, I think, Dr. Yoon. And she worked with an interdisciplinary team to help people with head and neck cancer. And I remember she told the story that the artists on the team, after interviewing the patients, they made these pictures that were kind of grotesque and deformed. And when the doctor saw them, they were super worried about showing these to the patients. They were like, didn't want to offend them. They felt like maybe this would be too much. But when they did show them to the patients were like, yes, this is exactly how I feel. That's exactly how it feels to have this cancer. I totally relate to these. And then the pictures were able to be used as part of the healing process. Some of the patients were there that night, and they shared about their experience. And I don't even remember all of what they said. I just remember it ended with them saying that their healing and hope was all because of love. And there I was in the back of the room crying my eyes out, because these presentations were giving me hope again that medicine could be beautiful, that it could be laced with art, and that it could be about loving people. So as my hope flourished, so did my artwork at school. I was fascinated by the body, and I was determined to express its dynamics and the aliveness of flesh. Here you can see some drawings, some paintings, and a sculpture. Almost all of these are made from live models, which is one of the beauties of the arts program at the U of A. We had a chance to really look at people, spend long hours looking at these people. Some of our models would have to stand there for like 3 hours straight, and we had the honor of drawing them. So I was really in love with drawing and painting the body, and I also tried my hand a bit at some artwork that was a little more politically minded. So on the left, that was a work about medication use in our modern world, and the one on the right was a bit more about how we're taught to consume media. And I didn't show any here, but I also explored a lot the intersection of spirituality and physicality with these like large, very strange paintings, some giant broccolis hanging in a back alley and giant strawberries in a dog park, that kind of thing. Okay, so now let's zoom into the summer of 2018. I had new hope for art and medicine. I was going to try and be a doctor, but I needed some summer research. So lucky for me, my parents had a neighbor who was a pediatric cardiologist named Dr. Simon Urschel. So I emailed him to ask if he knew of any summer projects that I could work on that combined art and medicine. And he replied back, you know what? It would be great if you could make some sort of comic for our teen heart transplant patients. And thus began one of the craziest summers of my life. So teenagers have the highest rates of organ failure out of any age group receiving solid organ transplants. And a lot of research suggests that it's lack of adherence to medications and the post-transplant lifestyle that are significant reasons for this. So my job that summer, I had the pleasure of interviewing teen patients, their parents, and healthcare providers to try and better understand what was going on. So here's what I discovered. Teenagers know a lot. They are resilient. They weren't bothered by so many aspects of the post-transplant life that I thought they would be, like doctor visits, getting needles, taking meds, the side effects of the meds. So why the non-adherence? From my interviews, I ended up predicting that one of the most significant struggles teens felt that they faced was conflict with nagging parents. Their whole lives, their parents had taken care of them, made sure they took their meds, drank enough water, avoided risky foods or activities. And now that it was their turn to take ownership of their own health, they were tempted to rebel against the regimen because it felt like their parents' thing and not their own thing. And so I thought, you know what? Like a comic strip about the transplant guidelines is just going to be another nagging voice to them. So I had to try a different strategy. So I ended up developing a full story, a graphic novel, a complete graphic novel with a teenage main character who had had a heart transplant when he was young. And the main plot of the story has nothing to do with transplants. It's about mutant worms who take over Edmonton and a wild journey to find a hidden professor, save the city from a surprise enemy. There are chickens and super goofy solutions to problems, and it's got some character. But all throughout the story, there are suggestions slipped in that if you're going to rebel against something, don't choose your health. That if you want to be free and wild, then keep your body healthy so that you can enjoy that freedom and do something good with it. As far as the art goes, I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed the hours and hours and hours and hours of just ink drawing. The book ended up being 40 pages long, so that's a lot of time just sketching. And I learned a lot about the art of creating narrative with pictures. So the book ended up being printed, and it got a lot of positive response at research presentations from healthcare providers and parents and patients. And I'm super delighted to say that this summer, it was actually sent out to all the teens who have heart transplants in Western Canada, or at least the ones who answered my phone call and gave us their address. So that's super exciting. And we're in the process of collecting questionnaires from these patients to see if they even like the book. And we're considering doing follow-up research to see if it makes a difference in adherence or attitudes toward post-transplant life. But like Manisha said at the beginning of the presentation, the difficulty is you can't just say, read this story, read this narrative, and you're gonna get such and such. The crazy thing about art is sometimes there's unpredicted results and you can't control it as clearly as you can some other things. So we're considering still doing that kind of research just to try and validate a little more, but we're not totally clear on how to do that yet. Okay, so before I move on to talking about my med school journey, I just wanted to share my final project that I worked on in my art and design degree. It's a really personal project, but I think that's the point of art, to become a person while making it and relating to other people's personness. So our last project was supposed to be something that combined a bunch of mediums. So I ended up making a giant installation and performance that people could walk into. So you'll see the roof and the sides of the room were roughly painted with blue and red in like a placental or like tree type shape. There were cushions for people to sit on, there's a heater, and there were womb sounds playing from a speaker. And I bought this giant piece of plastic and I melted it with a blowtorch and shaped it into this giant womb that I could climb into. I covered it with red gloss. I created an umbilical cord out of clear tubing. And so as people walked in, I was in the womb with my eyes closed, and I was slowly pulling a string of lights through the umbilical cord and slowly moving my limbs. And since I can't do that for you tonight, I put together a little collage of the space that hopefully communicates the feeling of it. And as I show it to you, I would like to read for you, not the official write-up that I submitted to my professor, but actually the raw poem that I wrote while I was making the work, because I think that it expresses a little more genuinely what it's about. It's warm and dark and red. It's warm and dark and red in this womb. For Stephanie, living this life is like being in the womb of her creator, living in darkness and confusion, being ignorant of her own self and of her creator's self, being sustained in inconceivable ways, being vulnerable and at the mercy of another, yet nestled, safe, warm, hearing again and again the heartbeat of her creator. She is her comfort and close companion, so close, so dark, not alone. The womb of the earth, creators created, holding her and nestled, nested, naked and unafraid. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, surgery to escape, breaking the fleshy surroundings, death, deadness, dying down into dirt, and yet not to sleep, but to birth, breach heaven. The surrounding space a memory made in moist and past places, but no longer real. All that is real becomes realer, the God she loves in the flesh before her eyes beheld at last, and she can see her hands wave above her, hands covered in blood and mucuses, lungs wailing for the first time. She is cleaned and fed and held against the breast that held her her whole life. And now, here I am in med school at the U of A. That's me getting my white coat on the right. It's been quite the adjustment. In the midst of torrential science, I'll often draw my professors and try and stay sane during class. I see why my science friends were stressed now. And in the first year, as my days were consumed with studying, I started to become afraid again that medicine was stuffy and strict like I thought before. But then I did this incredible elective called the Healer's Art. This is the pin that they gave us that I put on my backpack. So what it is small groups of students meet with a doctor mentor, and they have discussions about pain and loss, awe in medicine, humanity in medicine, and they're just really real times together. My doctor mentor told the craziest stories that totally span the scale from deep human suffering to complete awe and wonder at humanity. And I once again caught the hope that medicine, just like art making, could be a way to love humankind. I still love Jesus. I love that while we as doctors will never be able to fully heal someone or save them from death or change their hearts, that's exactly where he fits in the gaps for me. And as I think about my future practice, I'm excited to be a doctor who could whip out a drawing for a confused patient or design resources to better communicate home care instructions. Like I said before, when a person creates art, they're being vulnerable or giving a bit of themselves to the person they're creating for. And I want my patients to see my humanity in that way. One of my dreams is to ask patients who are dying if I can draw them. Just to help show them that I see them, that they're worth looking at, that they still radiate the beauty that is human life and breath. I'm also so excited by how art and medicine is gaining traction around the world, the incredible projects that are happening, collaborations that are happening, and patients that are being better loved by their healthcare system because of it. And you, just by being here, are part of that movement. And I'm so excited by Obliquity and how we'll explore intersections between ideas that seem so different from each other, but actually enrich each other when they're mixed. For me, those two ideas were being an artist and being a doctor, to express and to heal. My journey was a path to discover that both expressing and healing could be used to love others. And so I feel I'm where I'm supposed to be. So thank you everyone for coming on that journey through my life. Feel free to ask any questions or make comments. I'm very open to talk about my faith, any of the paintings or other artwork that I showed. If you want to know any art projects that I'm working on now or any questions about the graphic novel, feel free to ask.
Perhaps I'll ask a question and make a comment. Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your journey so openly. And it was beautiful to take that ride with you. Where you're now knee deep in the incredibly time-consuming and demanding, demanding trajectory of acquiring all the medical knowledge that you need to get your medical legs. How has that affected your ability time-wise, but also brain-wise, space-wise, to live and create the art that you love so much?
That's a great question. So I think I'll talk about the time and brain separately because it's been the opposite effect. So for the brain, I've never had so many ideas in my life. When I was an art student, I think I felt a little bit squeezed dry. But now as a med student, most of the things you're being taught to absorb information rather than being asked to always produce. And so I feel this pent up, I have so many ideas. So that's been actually super fun. I've got this sketchbook right next to me actually, that when I get an idea, I'll write it in there. But time-wise, it's been tricky. I'm trying to keep my Thursday afternoons to work on art, and that's been good, but I have to be really intentional about blocking off that time. And then, yeah, I think I also have to be careful. Sometime during the summer, I took some art commissions, and I have to remember that that's a different type of art. That's a art that's like specifically for another person, and there's timelines associated and that deadlines and that sort of thing. But my personal expression also needs a place to be expressed. And so sometimes that's just like a quick sketch before bed in a journal, or sometimes it's those Thursday afternoon sessions that really help me unload those things.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a question. Maybe I know MD students hate being asked about their futures, but what kind of specialty do you think is more or less conducive to this kind of praxis of integrating art into patient care, and even not necessarily on self-care, but is more open to you being expressive through these mediums?
Right. I think you can be an artist and whatever type of doctor. So you can just go home and have a beautiful practice that really helps you be a better doctor, because you're able to let things off your chest or really reflect well. But I guess if you're asking about but how can you incorporate a little bit more in the practice itself? I'm really excited about specialties where you have a lot of say in changing the way patient care happens. So ones where you have a lot more interaction with the patients. So you get to actually see their experience and ways that art could help that. Like this cardiologist, for instance, he works with patients after they've had their heart transplant. So he could see that there was a lack of educational materials that they could relate with there. But for me personally, I'm really excited about, well, I think I'm leaning towards this anyway, but family medicine. And I'm excited about the range of people that you see in that context, and possibly, I don't know if this is possible, I'm just an idealistic med student right now, but possibly having more time with the patients to possibly sketch a little bit more or chat with him. But my honest answer is I don't even really know, because I haven't been a doctor of any kind. I'm wondering if any of the current doctors who are here would have anything to say about that, about the opportunity for art in their practice.
I think I think you're right, not as a judgment of any other specialties, but as someone who's has many close friends in family medicine, that does lend itself very naturally to deep, long-standing relationships with space and time for reflection as you get to know a family. So I think that there is a very natural fit there. For some reason, and this is by no means trying to impose anything on you, Stephanie, but for some reason I can, as you were speaking, I could picture you as a family medicine physician doing palliative care. And I think it would hit so many, and please live your own truth. But I just pictured you sitting with these patients and having so much love and time to give them, and draw them like you wished. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's a real honor and a privilege to be with people when they're having complicated days.
So I'm a medical oncologist, and whilst you may not necessarily get a lot of time with many patients, although that can often change, and as things are progressing, one of the reasons that I love medical oncology is that you get to that deeper level of knowing your patients and their families very quickly, because you have to. And that was something that attracted me to the specialty. It's real. People live and people die. You get to know your patients really, really well. I think what's really interesting about sort of what you've talked about, it's kind of making me think, how could you bring some of this into the medical oncology world? Because frankly, I've not seen that being done at all. Obviously, I'm not Canadian, so I'm originally from Australia, and even in that space, I never really saw anything like that. But I think it has the potential to be really powerful. So again, if you're looking for that sort of connection with patients and getting to know who they are, I would say some of these specialties such as oncology, perhaps hematology, although they cure far more people than we do, that connection piece was the thing that attracted me to actually doing it in the first place. But again, don't decide early, try everything, figure out what you don't like, look at what's left. But try lots of things is what I would say.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I guess, Timber, I can add on to that again from the medical student perspective. I think it interestingly ties back to the whole when you're in high school or even in university and someone tells you there's a specific path to accomplish a certain goal. And I think in the realm of medicine and the ultimate, I guess, specialty that you decide to choose, which for me, I'll use my own example. For me, I think is pediatrics. And a big part of that is one, because of my artistic practice really relies on this sense of staying in this sense of wonderment that I think kids just innately always possess and have. And I think that for me as an individual, being surrounded by that environment is something where I feel my artistic practice thrives, but also I think my best version of myself and what I can offer to my patients as a doctor really blooms in that setting. And so I think, as people have kind of mentioned, there are, of course, certain specialties that lend themselves to deeper connections and longer portions of time to interact with patients. But I think fundamentally it comes down to, again, what Rebecca mentioned with shadowing and trying everything out, how you feel as not only an individual and as a medical student or a physician in that environment, but also how you feel as an artist. And again, it's me trying to make these parallels of, just as we so often separate our personal lives from our professional lives, I think we really need to work to find this middle ground of where we can exist in both at the same time. And they don't need to be, okay, right now I'm being this version of myself because I'm in this environment. And like Stephanie had mentioned, in order to practice this integration of your artistic side, whether it's Stephanie kind of drawing out her patients or drawing different things to help patients understand, in order to facilitate that, you really need to find a space where you feel you can be those, if we call it, two versions of yourself in a way that they connect and help you better serve your patients. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Any questions in general about Obliquity, or any questions for Stephanie? I'm seeing nothing so far. Steph, do you mind switching to the next slide?
I was going to ask if Stephanie can explain the turtle painting that she had in this last,
Oh, yeah.
this last slide.
The turtle is me. And it's the turtle in its art studio. And yeah, I haven't thought too deeply about what all the things represent, but this is one that I did this summer. Yeah, and I'm gonna gift it to my sister.
Amazing. Okay, so I guess we're gonna finish a little bit early tonight. Again, if anyone has any questions or wants to jump in, please let me know. So we actually have the pleasure of having our next speaker on the call. Dr. Samina Ali will be giving the next talk on October 19th at the same time, so 6 to 8 p.m. And she's called it Art for Non-Artists. I don't know if you would like to give a little intro to that, and then I can go through the rest.
The theme that emerged was, I'm not sure I feel comfortable calling myself an artist, so I'm very proud of all these wonderful colleagues on this call who clearly have incredible skills and are comfortable with that. Do I create some forms of art, mostly with word? Yes, but I really think of myself as a non-artist who uses artistic media to make sense of the world. But I wanted to make sure that if there were other individuals like myself who love and admire art, but maybe don't identify as an artist, how could they relate to art and humanities and connect it to healthcare without feeling like they had to produce an incredible work of art, as it were? And I'll bet you many of them do create incredible works of art. They just don't have the comfort to call it that, or it's not what they imagine beautiful art should look like. So I'd love to attract all of you here if it interests you, if that catches your attention, but also those who maybe don't think of themselves as artists. So that was the idea behind the title, was you don't have to be an artist to attend. Don't let the idea that this is poetry and humanities frighten you in any way.
Thank you. And also I'll send out the slides because all of these have links, our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, so that you can just click the icons there. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to individually reach out to Steph or I. If you email through the OBLIQUITY email account, then I'll direct it to Steph if needed, and I'll respond there if you have any questions for me specifically. And with that, I'm just gonna leave you. So as a part of this is our second year running the OBLIQUITY series, and we really wanna make sure that we're kind of hitting on the objectives and the hopes and wishes that the participants really want to get out of this workshop series. So if you have time, this QR code can be scanned by your phone, or I will also be sending this out via email. So if you have time to just fill out this feedback form so we can know how we did today, and also get an idea of what you're looking for in future events or future speakers, that would be amazing. And from both Steph and I'm sure she's gonna jump in at the end here, but I just really want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here. It's such an honor to be able to listen to all of your stories and hear you share about your artistic practices, and I'm really looking forward to the next few workshops and the rest of this year. So thank you again for your time.
Yes, I also wanted to say thanks, and also thank you so much during that teapot activity. I really enjoyed everyone's contributions, so thank you for taking part wholeheartedly.
Okay, I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you so much, and we'll hopefully see you next time.